Hello, I'm Tom Rogers, and this is the Rebel Education Podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rebel Education Podcast with me, Tom Rogers. This week, I'm going to be discussing building relationships in teaching, what it means and how you as a professional could go about it. I'm using the collective wisdom of my Twitter clan, of my personal learning network on Twitter, to provide some illustration on this. And also, I'm going to have some special guests who I will introduce later in the podcast. But for now, I just want to start with what building relationships in teaching means. So we're talking about the way in which you as a teacher have or build a collective feeling, both with your class or classes and also individual students within that group, and how you actually interact with those students. And it might be over time that you establish really strong bonds and connections with those students. And the interesting point for me is how that happens, or why that happens. Now, for me, in my career, I'm in year 13 now. Thank God I'm not actually in year 13, because then I'd still be in school, but I'm in 13 year of my teaching career. And I've worked in various different schools, and for me, it's about consistently good teaching and high expectations. That's how I have personally built the strongest and best relationships I've had with the students that I've taught, is kind of building that mutual respect over time. And that respect for me has been built up based on the quality of what I've tried to do. And I'm not talking about every lesson, because we all have bad lessons, but consistently over time, and they realise that you care. They realise that it means a lot to you, what you're doing in that classroom, that you're putting in a lot of effort for them, because teachers don't tend to be there for their contracts. They're there because they want to make a difference, and because they feel that their job matters, and it matters a lot. And for me, that's where my approach has always been. Every time I've stepped into a classroom, I've always wanted it to be the best it can be. And I think over time, maybe not in days, maybe not in weeks, but certainly in months and years, students can see that and they respect that. Also, the high expectations, just not accepting second best from students. That doesn't mean zero excuses for anything. It doesn't mean being draconian with students, but it does mean saying, here's my line where I want us to meet, and I am going to consistently strive for that line in everything I do, in every lesson. I'm not going to relent. I'm not going to kind of think, oh, you know what, it's May, the sun started coming out. Exam classes have gone. I'm going to take my foot off the gas. And I don't mean being a bit more relaxed as a teacher. I mean with the expectations of students. I mean with behaviour. I mean with the way in which you want them to act towards you and towards other students in the classroom, and being as professional as possible, wherever your line is. And for me, it's as high as I feel it can be, bringing common sense into it, because I think we all need to also respect that there needs to be an element of common sense in our classroom management and in how we enforce or instill our own expectations on students. So anyway, that's me, but other teachers are going to have very different ideas on how to do that. Deb Heppelstone commented on Twitter when I posed this question the other day on Twitter, and she said, it's about showing yourself as human, having clear boundaries, high standards, and demonstrating that you care and want the best for each individual. It takes time. So that more or less mirrors what I'd said earlier, but Adrian Bethune, who's an author and blogger, he is a primary school teacher, and he had something slightly different to say. He said, in primary, it means to me showing children that you're part of a team, and my team is my class. Showing them that they belong, that I care about them and what they think, that I have high expectations of them and that I'll hold them to it, that I'll support them when they struggle, that I'm interested in their lives. And that last comment about being interested in students' lives, that comes up time and time again in this thread where I ask teachers on Twitter how they build relationships. It's being genuinely interested. Although I have to say that one of the commenters, I can't remember which one it was, did say it matters that it's genuine. And I have to hold my hands up here. When you're rushed for time, when you're focusing on the next lesson and you're in the corridor or you're lining up with students and you're focusing on what you need to get through, quite often it can be very difficult to really invest and genuinely invest in the conversations that you're having with students. And I don't think as teachers we should beat ourselves up if that is the case. You know, at the end of the day, you're there to teach. Students are there to learn. And even if I agree with that statement, which a big part of me does, by the way, I think it's fantastic to have interest in the students' lives. But also we have to be, in my opinion, realistic about the time and how much investment we can give to every single student, because, of course, teacher well-being is also absolutely paramount and key. Nick Wood, he's at Mr_N_Wood on Twitter. He says, show them that you hold them in mind, even when they are out of sight. It's the one-to-one conversations between lessons or at break or lunch where this happens. How was X? Did you finish that Y? Did you keep that promise? I'm going to like that tweet by Nick Wood because I forgot to like it in the first instance. And I think that's really excellent. And again, it reflects on what Adrian had said as well about taking that interest, you know. This is an interesting comment by Grant White. Grant says, my biggest issue at the moment is with a group who do not want to engage with me. They're happy to do work in silence and complete exam questions, but they show absolutely no interest in me as a person, regardless of how much interest I take in them. How can I change this? I find that a really interesting one. And I do think that some teachers might get frustrated because they might feel I'm giving and giving and giving, and I'm being really respectful, I'm taking an interest, I'm being as friendly as I can, and I'm not really getting anything back. You know, and I think sometimes that can be really, really difficult to deal with. Again, I think my answer to that would be it comes down to expectations. And I guess some children don't know how to engage with adults properly. And, you know, sometimes it's about saying, okay, you know what? I accept this situation for what it is. I'm going to work with it, and I'm not gonna beat myself up if I don't have these super close relationships with these students, because every class is different. I've taught classes where I've ended with them and I've thought, you know what, I don't actually have that closer relationship with this group, but you know, these groups over here I've got a very, very close bond with, and actually sometimes there is not a magic formula as to why that happens. It just happens. And, you know, don't be surprised that if that group that you're struggling to develop a connection with, it's probably similar with other teachers, but they might not want to admit it to you and say, you know what, I've got the same problem. They might say, oh, you know, yeah, I get on well with them, but they might not, you know, and until you're with them in that classroom every lesson, you won't know what's going on. You know, so I think that's really important to keep in mind. Jennifer Webb, big fan of Jennifer on Twitter at Funky Pedagogy. She says, I'm very similar to me in terms of high expectations and good teaching. She says, once they realise I'm going to uphold my standards every single time the respect builds, they know where they stand, they know I care, and I show it by being firm but having a sense of humour and a personality. We can have joy hand in hand with academic success. Really like that. Really like that from Jennifer, and I totally agree with it. Mama Bear, interesting Twitter handle, the Mama Bear with a love heart. She says, being genuine, real smiles, conversations, wanting the child to do well for their sake, as opposed to some external reward. I liken it to loving that child as if they were my own. That's a tough call. She certainly is Mama Bear with a heart. That's lovely. I do think this is the thing. I've got mixed views on that being genuine bit, because I do think that teaching is a performance piece quite often, and I do think that playing a role in the classroom is sometimes essential. Acting as though you are more angry than you are, or frustrated than you are, acting like you're more upset than you are, and so on. I think these things have always played a part in good teaching. I really do. So, you know, being genuine, real smiles, conversations, yes. But maybe not all the time. Maybe sometimes you do have to pull the performance piece on. I honestly believe that. Andrea Taylor, be relentlessly bothered. I like that. Be relentlessly bothered about the students. Callum at Callum_send on Twitter. Pupils feeling safe in your care. To learn, explore, laugh, cry, and confide through unconditional, positive regard, empathy, honesty, and love. I like that as well. And I could go on, and actually, if you want to have a look at this thread, it's I posted it on the 28th of February at 9:26 on my account at Rogers History, and there were more than 300 responses looking at how you build relationships with students. So I hope you found those bits interesting. And now I'm going to turn to my special guests on the podcast, and we're going to hear a little bit from them on how they build relationships with their students.
I'm Nick Wood. That's at Mr_N_Wood on Twitter. Building relationships with young people is, for me, it's all about holding them in mind, even when they're out of sight. And you do this by things like one-to-one conversations, maybe at the end of a lesson, or a break, or lunch, maybe in a corridor. For example, you might say, "How was X?" where X is something you've already talked to them about before, reminding them that you've spoken to them before and that you've obviously thought about them in the interim. Did you finish that? Y could be a piece of homework, could be a piece of art they were working on. Did you keep that promise? Promises is one of the ways that I try and help children who misbehave. I get them to promise themselves they won't repeat that thing, maybe for a short period of time, just for 24 hours or for a week. Because promising that you'll never do it again is probably a promise you'll break. So checking in with that promise once in a while is a great way to show them you're holding them in mind. The other thing I think is important is just to be determined to know each child, especially the ones that make it hard to get to know them. Whether that's the ones you kind of don't really want to like when you first meet them, the ones that challenge you, or the ones that hide and just want to avoid getting to know any teacher at all. Get to know something about them so that you can have those conversations.
Hello, my name's Chris Waddle. I'm the Deputy Head Teacher at St George's School in Blackpool, and Tom's asked me to discuss what building relationships in teaching is all about and what that means to me. Relationships with children is so powerful. Develop those relationships really, really well. Those professional, really wholesome relationships that you develop with children, especially during unstructured time. Unstructured time is the key time for me to get to know your children. As they're coming through the gate in the morning, saying good morning to them, smiling at them, asking them about specifics. So if you know that they've been at a judo competition at the weekend, asking them how they've done and how they've got on, or whatever it might be, get to know the children. Get to know them during the break times and the lunch time. Sit with them at lunch, talk to them at lunch. And of course, we're not just trying to develop them educationally, we're developing them as young, rounded individuals that are going to be in leadership positions of the future in our society and active members of society. And that family dining experience, that's a critical experience for children. They may or may not have that experience at home, and by you providing that during the school day, that might be the turning point for them, that you really care about them, and just sitting down with them and eating with them and discussing things. And the same with break time too. When you're passing them, say hello, smile at them. It's very, very difficult for a young person to treat you badly when you treat them so well. And kids remember. Kids know which members of staff, which adults really seem to care about them. And one of the ways in which you can demonstrate that care for them is by talking to them and getting to know them, and not just at the chalk face. It's about getting to know them in that wider context. And again, be specific with the children. Mentioned that before about, just came to my head, just judo or horse riding or whatever it might be. But then you can offer some of that as well in challenge. If a child doesn't meet those high expectations that you have, then you might want to use that to your advantage. So, for example, I'm thinking of a young girl now who gets up every morning very, very early and goes ice skating. And she's a fantastic ice skater, but sometimes within schools she can cause disruption. But then, knowing the ice skating that she does every single day, you talk to her and say, look, you're so disciplined in what you do. You get up so early and you get to the ice rink so early. You're so disciplined. Be disciplined in the classroom. Take that same discipline that you have ice skating and use that in the classroom. Do that in the classroom. Be disciplined.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to the podcast. I'm Julie Schubert, and I currently teach at P7 in sunny Scotland. I'm an early career teacher in primary, so if you're listening and wondering, it might just be my inexperience, idealism, and optimism speaking. Some ask me to talk about building relationships. Generally speaking, I feel it is important to look at the person in front of me, not just the learner, the pupil. We all come with luggage, and although I don't need to know every single item in the backpack called life my counterpart carries, I feel I need to know the big bits, the ones that make the suitcase bulge, that give the backpack its individual shape or stick out. So far, I've not rummaged through files to find out. I watch and listen. I read the answers for classwork, not just in a learning context. I constantly tell my class that we're a team. Teaching and learning works best when we do it together, pulling on the oars together to get across the sea. Learning is a journey, and we all know it's not straightforward and can be frustrating at times. So morale is important. Trusting each other that somehow we'll make it through and get there. Respecting each other's differences. Chipping in when one stumbles. Helping each other make use of the talents. Having a laugh and knowing that we can't all know everything. Occasionally, I have to remind my class that I'm not an almanac or dictionary on two legs. I'm very open about my own difficulties as an EAL and will ask them for help when I just can't find the right word. I make mistakes. I'm in the wrong sometimes and I have emotions. I show them when I'm worried, when I'm chuffed, when I'm grumpy. Not everyone approves of that, but I'm a human. And one of the ways we communicate is showing emotions. I know some people don't approve of that, and Paul Dix certainly campaigns for the calm, collected, consistent adult in the room. I'm not there yet. I'm working on it. However, pip and rip, praise in public, reprimand in private are important tools, especially in the upper school, I feel, where learners are conscious of their, let's call it, street value. It shows that I'm respecting the continuum of the person in front of me beyond my class. Having a chat about displeasing or unwanted behavior happens during break times when the class is gone, but other relationship building happens then as well. Tom, I'd like to speak to you before you go for break. Checking in. Asking how the swimming went, the dancing competition, if the sister's feeling better. It doesn't need to be about an issue during a lesson, and this takes the anxiety away from that sentence. I'd like to speak to you. I remind myself how it was when I was their age, trying to find my way into the system called school, with all the pitfalls within and outside the classroom. Now, I didn't have internet when I was in P7, so I'm trying to be mindful of that. I ask the same in return. My school kids know I'm a mum. They know what Mr. Schubert does. They know some about my life outside the school. It's only fair to me. When my voice is going, I ask them to chip in. If I've made a mistake and given the wrong person a teacher look or question the wrong person's interest in their learning, I apologize. If someone is stuck, I lower my voice to help, visit to others, and then address the issue for the class if it's something they can all benefit from. If I speak to someone about behavioral issues, I make sure I lower myself to eye level, leaning against the table while we talk, sitting next to each other on the chair, on the floor. Open body language, eye contact where appropriate. Sometimes it's acknowledging the other person is not ready to talk. And all the seriousness of the classroom needs to be balanced out at times. My drama tutor, Nikki Doig, always said, never expect the pupil to do something you wouldn't do. So, at times, they get to choose what we do. I ask them for feedback about a lesson, how they think I should improve. Sometimes I'm in front of the class learning. It can be a game in PE, or words in a new language, a TikTok dance, a Fortnite move, lots of things. And yes, it feels uncomfortable, and they know it. They do it all the time. It's a leap of faith. When you jump and fall, that's when the magic happens. After the initial panic, you see there are others. Someone might reach out to hold your hand. Someone might share their parachute. Someone might have a rescue net ready, or, most surprising of all, your feet might find the ground. Learning is a leap of faith. Relationships are a leap of faith, and both only work with honesty, trust, and respect. So if someone were to ask in one sentence, how do you build relationships? My answer is, have faith, take the plunge, be a person, a human, reach out.
Thanks ever so much for listening to this episode of the Rebel Education Podcast. I've been Tom Rogers, and thanks very much to all the guests who've joined me to discuss this really, really interesting issue and topic. If you want to follow the conversation a bit further, you can follow me on Twitter at Rogers History, or visit my website at rogershistory.com. You can listen to this podcast across everywhere, basically: Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and anywhere else you can find it. This has been the Rebel Education Podcast, and I will see you next time. Cheers, everyone. Bye.